gentlemen, welcome to the Heysal podcast, episode number 22. Is it 22, Peter?
It is 22. I think we got it right this week.
By the way, it's intern Peter's birthday today. Happy birthday, Peter.
Hey, world. It is my birthday today.
Cool.
20th birthday on the 22nd podcast, so we're feeling good, and I think we got a great show ahead.
Awesome, man. And I'm very happy, and we are very happy to have a special guest on tonight, Elisabeth Cutler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sal. Really nice to be here.
I really appreciate you coming all the way here to Trastevere to this podcast here tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
And so for everybody who doesn't know you yet, our viewers and listeners at home, maybe you can tell us a little story about yourself before you decided to become a musician, which you are,
Also,
and before you came to Rome. Like, what brought you to this place?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a long story. Let's see. I was born in Boston, in the States, and yeah. As a matter of fact, my first love was playing guitar. So this was, I think, was my first passion, really. But you know, as a songwriter, I think we start out in our bedrooms a lot. So I really enjoyed writing progressions on guitar. That's how music came into my life. And of course, I grew up in the 70s in the States, and there was a lot going on everywhere, I think, in the 70s, and music was part of, I guess it was the soundtrack of our life, and a cultural revolution, I think, around the world, and in the Western world at least. But it's funny, what was I before I was a musician? I mean, I really started playing guitar when I was like 10 years old or so, 11 years old. And then I got more serious about it at 14, when you really had to sort of define yourself as who you were and coming into your teen years. But I was never interested in singing at all, really. And then I found this program. I thought I would work in the music field for a career, but not have to be a musician. So I studied instrument repair, musical instrument repair, and I became a musical instrument repair technician, with repairing brass and woodwinds.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I did a little violin, and guitar was a whole separate study for repair, and as a luthier, you really had to go into the whole field on its own, I think, which I got into a little bit, but I really liked being involved in music, but not have to be on stage. I really was not interested in being on stage. I just really enjoyed playing guitar and writing guitar songs, and then I started using poetry books, and also the poetry of my brother, who is a published poet, professional poet. I use poetry to other people's poetry to put to my guitar songs. And eventually I started writing my own lyrics also, but not until I was like 19 or so did I really decide to focus on writing my own lyrics. So I had all this going at the same time, and I was in, I guess I've always liked to travel a lot, and so I wanted to go out west from Boston, the East Coast. I grew up. So when I was 16, I left Boston. Okay. And I went to a school in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul area, the Twin Cities. And it's kind of this alternative school designed as a year in between high school and college, where you could get out and experience the world and try some internships and just have a year off before you started college.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I continued west. It was really exciting to be out west. It was kind of the Wild West and independent living, I think, and so much space out
So
there.
we're talking about the West in the United States.
Yeah, the Western U.S., and it's just beautiful, and it is a little bit wild. It was a little more wild in the 70s, I guess. But and that's where I found this musical instrument repair program that I studied for 2 years in a community college. At the same time, I was studying guitar, classical and kind of finger-picking style with a guitar teacher at the college. And I did start performing in... I was just scared to death. In Spokane, Washington, I remember my first performance in a coffee shop. And then I did move to Seattle, Washington, and I got a job as a repair technician in a music shop. And, you end up repairing all the school instruments that the kids destroy all year long. And during the summer, we repaired all the school instruments.
But it was mainly oil instrument, like brass instruments and...
Yeah, saxophone, flute, clarinet... And then trumpets and trombones, flugelhorns. I really liked that, working with my hands, and it was a great career as a young person. But there I was in Seattle, and there was quite a great coffee house scene starting there. So. I started playing in the coffee houses, and at the same time I started writing my own lyrics. And the first musician I played with was a tabla player. He played tablas and doumbek.
Okay.
He was my next-door neighbor, and we had a great time. And so he accompanied me on these trips to the coffee houses, and it was a real coffee house scene in Seattle. It rains a lot in Seattle, so and a big university town. So really, they were these fantastic coffee houses, really big and crowded and fun.
So, but to go back to your the moment you picked up playing an instrument, like, was there a moment that inspired you to pick up the guitar when you were a young child? Like, there's this famous story of Bruce Springsteen who saw Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Oh, yes.
And that was the moment when he got inspired to pick up the guitar. But his hands were too small.
Oh.
So he, stopped playing for a while, and then later he picked it up again to famously start the E Street Band. But was there a moment for you that kind of inspired you to play guitar, or was it just some passion that developed over time that you wanted to play something?
No, there was something specific. It wasn't one moment, but when I was 10 or 11 years old, there was a wonderful art teacher in our school, and she made a little group of students after school who wanted to learn to play the guitar. I never went to it because it was in a different town than where I lived. But all my girlfriends went to it, so they taught me everything that they were learning. And there were little, nylon string classical guitars around people's houses, and I asked for one for my birthday. I got this very cute little one. When I was 11 or something, I think. So it became kind of a thing to do with girlfriends, and they were showing me all the chords, and that's what we would do when we get together. But it was from this art teacher. She was teaching folk songs, and then I could go to my neighbor's house, and they knew some folk songs. So it was very close at home and school. But it was... sort of a naive, fun game, really.
Did your parents encourage you to play?
Oh, they always did, yes. My father played cello. And, but I think how the story goes, my grandmother forced him to put the cello down when he was a teenager and go into sports. So a young man... shouldn't be seen playing a musical instrument, apparently.
Wow.
A young man should be on the football team.
Should be a rough male,
Yes,
kind of masculine.
It's okay for a
thing.
young boy to play violin or an instrument, but not after a certain age, apparently. So he saved his cello. It was in the attic, and he brought it down a couple of times, and he would always talk about his cello. But that was the only musician in my family. Okay. But as I said, I did grow up in the 70s, and I have 3 older brothers, and I'm the youngest of my family. So my 3 older brothers just, outfitted the house with great albums. So I had a built-in album collection that I inherited from my brothers. And so music was so important in the 70s. And they were older than me, going to college. So it all came home to me quite conveniently. I remember every Beatles and Rolling Stones album on a birthday that would come into the house.
Wow.
I remember my brothers going to a Rolling Stones concert, and I couldn't go. And I remember Woodstock happening, and I couldn't go because I was too little.
Okay.
But I was there, and I'm really glad that I'm the age I am, because I did come up with all of that, and it was all being created in such a natural, spontaneous way that reflected exploration and experimentation and what was happening. And I mean, Jimi Hendrix was just my favorite, at that time. And I remember being where I was when it was announced his death,
Okay.
Yeah, and they usually say that about JFK, President Kennedy, that everybody remembers where they were. And I also remember that, actually.
Okay,
And
wow.
I was really little. I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old when that was announced. And I thought, I remember saying out loud, we were in the car, and I said, "Oh, if he had lived a few days longer, he would have had Thanksgiving." And so he was shot right before Thanksgiving in November. Yeah. And I remember them announcing on the radio when Jimi Hendrix died. Yeah. So I'm glad I came up in that time. It was.
It's a strange feeling when you hear that on the radio or when you hear the news, I suppose.
Yeah.
I remember when Michael Jackson died.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I was in Rome.
Yeah.
And I still remember that feeling. I wasn't even a big Michael Jackson fan, but it's just somebody who's part of your life.
Yes.
Somebody's music is part of your life. It just feels really strange to.
Yeah.
You don't even know the person personally, but it's as if you would somehow.
Yeah, that was unbelievable. It's like, no, Michael Jackson can't die. And even all of these all these rock stars who are older now, all these pop music and who are older now, who I grew up listening to, I never thought that they would age, you just think that they would always be the way they looked. I mean, these are your heroes that are... they're like movie stars, that are untouchable. You should not know anything about their personal life. They should be secret and mysterious. Now everybody wants to know everything about people's lives, but a lot of those people never gave interviews, and I think it's more romantic and mysterious to have this hero worship, where you can project yourself and all of your dreams onto, this untouchable
Do you have heroes?
person. Oh yes, I do. And they say you shouldn't meet your heroes either. I don't.
Did you?
No,
Okay.
I've never met her.
Who's the hero?
Well, I would say, without hesitation, really, I think Joni Mitchell.
She's still alive.
Yes, she is.
Still alive and kicking.
Yes, she's even coming back to life. Unbelievable how she's come through a very bad brain aneurysm in 2015, and was found after 3 days unconscious in her house.
What?
Yeah.
I missed that one. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And if anyone can do it, she can, because she also has this strength of character that probably came into her character as a small child at maybe 8 years old or something. She had polio. Like Neil Young also. They both were from Canada, and they both had polio when they were little kids.
Okay.
There was a polio epidemic, and they got it at the same time. They didn't know each other, but different parts of Canada, I think. But and she was told that she would never walk, and she was absolutely determined as a little kid that she would walk again, and she would do exactly what they said she couldn't do.
Right.
And now she's had this brain aneurysm, and which put her into a wheelchair, and I'm quite sure she wasn't talking for the last few years. Now there are just pictures you can follow. Finally some news is coming out, and it's showing her she's standing up on her own, now with a cane. I mean, it's unbelievable. This force of life that she has. So
she has lost speech now, though, or reduced speech.
You know, I think that's been mentioned a few times, but it's not publicized that much.
Okay.
And she has not been on camera talking.
Okay.
No, in 5 years.
I saw an interview recently, and I was not under the impression it was a recent one, but probably was already a few years older.
No.
Yeah. Okay. I did not know
but
that.
great pictures of her, and she has this resilience. So this is the kind of hero I'm glad that I have as an example of that she's, I would call her a mentor, because I do listen and watch what she does.
Right.
Even though I think you can have a mentor that you don't know personally, but a mentor is supposed to tell you what to do and how to do it and everything. Well, she does tell everybody what to do and how to do it. But I've always followed her, and she was the first artist that touched me personally, because I inherited all these great albums from my brother's collection, but when I made a decision of what I wanted to listen to, I chose her. Actually, my first boyfriend gave me her first record.
Wow. Okay.
When I was 14 years old, and that's when I was really seriously starting to play guitar, and he was also a musician, and yes, she really spoke to me, I think. Her first album is just a two-sided LP of a continuous story. It's really like a book, and the songs are the chapters of her going from the mountains to the seaside, and all her stories along the way. And so I continued to follow her as a folk artist, and then of course, I grew up with all different kinds of music, and I think all of us did, especially in the 70s. From folk music grew into kind of folk rock when Bob Dylan put down his acoustic guitar and picked up an electric guitar and was booed off stage, was booed by all of his folk fans on his, especially his European English tours in England. They didn't like his change to electric, but the times were changing.
As he sang,
Yeah.
famously.
Yeah.
I think you can see all the videos because he released, I think just last year, or was it this year? He had secretly recorded everything. And I think he released everything and gave it away
Dylan
to a
bootleg.
museum, I think.
Oh, really?
I think he sold it to them, but he sold it at a very, very low price. So he was not really making... Because he could have made a lot of money off that. But he just basically gave it away and all his manuscripts and all his notes and everything. So I think there's a museum.
Yeah.
Not sure if you can look it up eventually later. Peter, intern Peter,
A museum? Yes, I'd like
Possibly.
to know.
where that museum is. But yeah, it's
Well, following
quite something.
Yeah, following these artists who did go through changes, from the folk artists and the songwriters. There is a movie, a film. It's a documentary. Hotel California, it's called, I think, and it is interviews and a documentary about the time of the songwriter scene from the 60s and 70s in Los Angeles, specifically in Laurel Canyon, where all these people lived together. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and the Mamas and Papas, Joni Mitchell, Frank Zappa. It was a Laurel Canyon scene there. And really the first artists, I think, were the Byrds, who, like in maybe about 64 or so, were writing their own songs. This is when the singer-songwriter really started. Now, the Beatles were doing this. Their first, I think, worldwide, like international hits came out with Meet the Beatles in 64. But they had been touring and doing cover songs a lot, I think.
In Germany.
Yes, out of Hamburg. But slowly they started writing their own. They were doing covers and rock and roll and blues artists, and not until George Martin was really pushing them to write their own, I think. So this whole singer-songwriter scene that came up in the 60s and 70s, especially out of California. But then there was the New York scene with Bob Dylan and Paul Simon, who refused to go to California, I think. And Woody Allen also refused to go to California. But it was quite different because the artist was writing their own songs. And of course, Bob Dylan started this also in the 60s. Before that, the songwriter and the musician were separated, like the Tin Pan Alley and all the 50s and 40s and 30s, the years of 30s, 40s, 50s. Frank Sinatra never wrote his songs. So the Tin Pan Alley scene of all the beautiful jazz standard songs were written by songwriters, the lyricists, Rodgers and Hammerstein, the pairs, the people who worked together. And even Motown, of course, had songwriters on their payroll who were writing the songs for the artists coming out of Motown, until Marvin Gaye started writing his own and said, no, I want to do my own thing. And it was really different what Marvin Gaye did out of writing his own. So there's this wonderful original scene that started coming up out of the artists, and they were singing and playing their own songs instead of doing kind of a standard song from a standard songwriter. And then it went into this experimental kind of cultural revolution at the same time through the 60s and 70s, and music was happening all interwoven with that, politically, socially. So a lot of experimentation and playing the guitar differently, like Joni Mitchell and Jimi Hendrix. There's a wonderful story of Jimi Hendrix going to a Joni Mitchell gig, and he carried a reel-to-reel tape recorder into the club and put it on stage and turned it on to record her to understand how she was playing the guitar. And there's a wonderful picture of Eric Clapton. They're under a tree with a few other people. Eric Clapton just sitting there staring at Joni Mitchell playing her guitar, because none of these guys had seen a guitar played the way that Joni Mitchell was playing it. And she didn't do it to be different. She actually started playing ukulele, I think a bass ukulele, before she played guitar. And then she had, from her polio that she had as a young child, she had some limitations in her hands physically. Okay. So she could only do some flat positions. She couldn't do all the tight positions that is required. So all of this was happening very naturally. You know, it wasn't planned, and of course there wasn't a place you could really go except for a guitar teacher. You could find a guitar teacher maybe at a music store or something to learn guitar, because it started becoming fashionable. Or someone would just teach you the chords, and maybe there'd be a book in a music store or something that would have the chords written down. But it was always between people, and you had to show each other chords. And I was into experimenting. I mean, I didn't study before. I think it was important, this part of my learning guitar, to teach myself first, and to experiment and to play around first before you go into a formal situation with a teacher or a conservatory or a music school or something. I started playing myself, and I was experimenting myself with strange chords. And nobody told me to do that. I didn't even know that there were different tunings. I didn't know that Joni Mitchell was changing the tunings on her strings. And maybe just from listening to her a lot, I had this in my ear, but I didn't know what she was doing. I didn't go out and I didn't know when interviews came out with her or anything, or talked about her. I didn't really know about music magazines when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. But anyways, I guess I just started making these like 2-finger chords and all these strange voicings, and just playing around, experimenting with the guitar, and maybe putting together a progression, But that was all just for my entertainment. I never planned on performing, that's for sure. So, and now I enjoy it. And I finally had to learn how to sing, really. It didn't come all that naturally to me. But yeah, eventually it's become, I was the reluctant performer. Yeah, I was very nervous, and I think this happens with songwriters. They're not focused on being the center of attention.
Like nervous to perform in front of people?
Yeah, definitely. Songwriters are in their bedrooms writing songs for themselves. And, I mean, the thought of trying to play it for someone else, you didn't really write it for someone else. But it is a natural progression that if you create something, you really, it ends up going out into the world. I mean, I've learned that my cycle of recording, my cycle of being an artist, I think, is writing, recording, and performing. So you write it, and then you want to put it down to keep it, and then it's natural to get out there and show it to people. So eventually that happens, but a lot of songwriters are not, they're not vocalists, which thankfully a songwriter ends up having a very unique voice. It's like a talking voice, a speaking voice. I mean, Bob Dylan was not planned on being a singer. That's not why he got into songwriting, He's singing actually better than ever now. These recent albums he's done of the jazz classic.
Voice dropped a lot in all these years. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. He's doing standard jazz albums now. And he's using original equipment that they recorded with. He's using reel-to-reel and the real microphones. And his voice just sounds incredible, rich and deep and full and wonderful, and relaxed, and I think he sounds pretty good as young, a very young voice, but you do end up wearing down your voice.
Oh yeah. I don't think he ever got formal training or used much technique. I think he just did it.
Yeah, no, on the job experience, I think.
Right. Exactly.
But I think as songwriters do end up having original voices, and they're not trained like dogs
Right.
to sound like everybody else. They're not trained in the same way to have the perfect voice so that you sound like the singer on the radio.
Right. I'd rather listen to somebody who is not pitch perfect and doesn't sound like an auto-tune artist off the shelf.
Oh, good.
And rather have somebody who, I mean, I like a lot of Irish music, for example. It's comes from the heart. It's
Yeah.
a bit more rough around
Yes,
the
yes.
edges,
Yes,
but
yes.
it's much more authentic very often.
Yes.
And so that's the kind of music I like. Also Bruce Springsteen is one good example. He doesn't have a
Yes.
beautiful voice at all. Like, he's got a very unique, characteristic voice,
Yes,
though. So it's
yes.
beautiful in a different way.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
perfect. It's not a perfect voice
No.
in that sense.
But full of emotion and very
yes.
unique, and
It's authentic. It's real,
Yeah.
or it feels like that, definitely. So how did you overcome your fear, let's say, to perform your
Stage fright?
Yes. Do you still have it?
Oh, no, not so much. I like a little adrenaline, It kind of you should have some excitement and adrenaline, I think, going through your veins
Right.
when you get on stage or perform. But I even to digress a little. Even I read an interview with Jeff Beck, and he said, he plays every day. He plays at home alone every day and practices every day. And he said I still can't play on stage in front of people the way that I play when I'm alone. Why can't I play the way that I play when
true.
I'm alone on stage in front of people?
All right.
So they're kind of two different situations. That's the whole challenge, I think, is connecting. If I really stay connected with the song, and I'm playing all of my own songs, I really don't do any cover songs. I have 7 albums of original material, so and I love a lot of cover songs, and I do maybe a couple cover songs, but when you're playing your own songs, you really have a built-in connection, an emotional, personal, physiological connection with the song. So this probably helps relax me and feel. You just have to feel connected when you're on stage. But I've come to enjoy it. I mean, I've grown up as a person more. I think it's more about how you relate to yourself and how you feel about yourself, and I think I've had a character that I've been quite insecure for a lot of my life. I think about myself, and getting on stage when you just aren't so sure of yourself is terrifying, to be under any judgment or spotlight
Right.
or criticism or but now I feel a lot better about who I am, and now I'm sort of on the other side of it. I'm really quite I have a healthy ego, and I really feel my music is worthwhile. I think it's my songs are valuable, and I think of myself as a songwriter now, not as just a guitarist, because that's what I became as a songwriter. I still don't think of myself as a singer. That's just something I had to do eventually. If you write the songs, who's going to sing them? You know,
Right.
I mean, if you're not a writer on Tin Pan Alley, you know, and you're writing these kind of funny, quirky, personal songs, you better learn how to sing them. So
Exactly. Right. I agree with you. But so when you started out, I suppose that you didn't get your gigs right away, or did you get gigs right the moment that you finished writing your first album or your first songs, or were there
Yeah.
opportunities back then in the States still? I suppose that you were still in the States then, right?
yes,
Playing
yes.
open mic nights or something like that, or did
Yeah,
you
the
open
coffee house scene.
That's the coffee house scene then. It's like
Yes.
the open mics that we have here. Okay.
Yes, yes. Yeah, Seattle was the first coffee houses, and then I ended up going to. I just have always loved to travel and explore. It's kind of my personality is experimental, I think. I went to the Southwest, to New Mexico, and I went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that's when I started playing, I guess, as a professional. I was a guitarist, a rhythm guitarist, in a person's band. So they weren't my gigs, actually. And then this guy, he wanted to do a duo with me, so we were doing some of his songs and maybe a couple of mine, and cover songs, and yeah, I was doing more my own in Seattle. I was doing all my own in Seattle, and a few funny folk kind of cover songs. I was kind of into the British songwriters, probably. Not so much the blues. I gravitated towards more of the guitar playing and the more finger-picking guitar styles,
Okay.
I think. And I remember I really liked Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I liked, of course, Joni Mitchell, and that whole kind of L.A. songwriter scene. But I was getting into classical and jazz, and I studied classical guitar. Then anytime I would go to study guitar, I often found jazz. You could study jazz guitar. We're like at some music schools, and just private music schools. And kind of one-on-one. I just find a guitar teacher, and in Seattle I studied a little with a finger picking, and but yeah, becoming a professional meant playing in bars.
That's what many professionals started.
Yeah. The coffee house scene was free, I guess. You didn't get paid there, and then going to the bars, you were suddenly a professional. And then I made the move to Nashville, Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was a big kind of
change.
career move. Yeah, it wasn't really my idea. I went with a guy who was a drummer, my boyfriend, and from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Wow.
And so that's when the real professionalism and I learned what the term artist means. That's not just a painter or somebody who draws pictures. It's actually a creative person, and it's a creative musical person too.
Well, it's also an art to survive as a musician.
Is it an artist? What is it?
To survive as a musician, like to make money as a musician, basically.
Yeah,
Because that's another question I would have for you: is did you just survive on doing your gigs and repairing instruments before that?
Yeah.
Or so you got around with that, or
Yes. Well,
you
you
other
see,
jobs?
that's why I repaired instruments, so I wouldn't have to rely on music for an income. So I was a repair technician, and I could do that by day, and then I could play all I wanted at home. You know, I didn't have to go on stage. But yeah, it is a natural process that you end up showing your songs to people and to share them. Yeah, your creative work goes out into the world, and I still keep the sort of the ethic or something that it's really not about me, it's about the songs. This is what I'm trying to get out. Like, I've just recorded my 7th album. It's the 3rd album that I've recorded in Rome, and I just want to get the music out there, and I think the songs are valuable, and that the songs should go out. It's really not about me as an artist, you know. But I'm really glad to be the one who presents them, actually, because they're real, they're authentic, they are really personal. In Nashville, where is sort of the music publishing capital of the world, probably.
Right.
It's the publishing capital of the world because they publish the most Bibles there.
Okay.
Do you know this? And then there's just this whole songwriting scene there, and it is more the old way of separating the writer from the artist. There's when I lived in Nashville in the 90s, there's 2 streets and both sides of the streets, they're one-way streets, and they're just lined with houses, just regular houses that are publishing houses, actually, and have upstairs and downstairs in the bedrooms and in the basements and any separate room that they could put a desk and a chair and stick a songwriter in there from 9 to 5 all day long writing songs. And then they would demo. They'd have every house had a studio in the basement, and they would demo the songs with some singers who, of course, there are a lot of singers all the time. There's a lot of singers out there.
So I heard, yeah.
Who don't have songs. So they would hire a singer and record the song as a demonstration of how the song could sound.
Right.
And then artists, the real singers, would come with their manager, and they would pay a visit to the publishing house, and the publishing house would play these demos for the artist and their manager, and they would go through all these songs, and maybe they'd have the lyrics printed, and see if they liked any of the songs, and they would record the real version. So there was it was really, you know, it was a songwriting factory. And Nashville has always been that way. The business has always been focused on country music, but and the musicians and the songwriters. I mean, it's the only city in the middle of the mid-South U.S. in Nashville, Tennessee. Everyone in Italy knows it because of Jack Daniels. Yes, in Tennessee is where Nashville is, and it's the only large city for many, many miles. So a lot of people would come there. A lot of people ended up there, and it became, you know, probably from the Grand Ole Opry, they were broadcasting out of Nashville. WSM, I think, was the radio station that it was AM radio and an enormous signal. I mean, people in Chicago heard it. And everybody grew up with this radio station back in the 50s or something, 40s and 50s maybe. I'm quite sure, I hope I'm right, that it was broadcasting out of Nashville, and then it was broadcasting out of the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. I'm not really into the country music history because I never grew up with country music. I grew up in Boston, which is known for folk music,
right.
And maybe it became rock music also, but country music is folk music commercialized. That's my answer to what's the difference between folk music and country music.
Okay.
country music became a genre, and the business called it country music. I think it was always just sort of folk blues or Delta blues, or it was folk music, coming out of the Appalachian Mountains. It was folk music, European influence, European immigrants. With their small instruments that they carried on the boats, were creating folk music. So Nashville really did attract a lot of people, and the music from the Grand Ole Opry. If I'm correct, I think the Grand Ole Opry is a stage presentation, so it can be moved to different places. It's a group. It was a group of people. It wasn't an actual building, but it was broadcast out of on radio out of the Ryman Auditorium in downtown Nashville, which they finally remodeled and they fixed it up when I lived there, and now it's just a gorgeous performance space.
So you arrived there as a young lady in Nashville,
yes,
and you saw,
in the 90s.
You saw this industry and how things work there. What kind of impact did it have?
Yeah.
Did it impact your vision on music or on the music business?
It was my first exposure to real business, to the music business. Yeah. So I learned for 13 years. I lived there. I made 4 albums there, and I learned a lot there. And I learned a lot about writing songs there, because the focus is songwriting in Nashville. And then the business kind of moved in, and they started pumping out country music and singers and stars. And but for me, it's always the song that is most important. I certainly learned that in Nashville. I learned it's really the song that you remember. You don't necessarily remember who sang it. Of course, it helps to have a good presentation with a singer, with a good singer. But if it's a great song, it can be recorded by hundreds and thousands of people in all different genres. If it's a great song, it's adaptable to anybody and any genre and anything and any place, anywhere. It's the song that you remember. It's like, oh, wasn't that a great who sang that? I don't remember who's, often you don't know who sang the song. So in Nashville, I studied songwriting by going to the clubs where they created, there's one club there called the Bluebird Cafe, and they did create, I think there's a documentary now about the Bluebird Cafe, but they created this this haven for songwriters to debut their songs that they had just written that were not recorded.
Okay.
And they created this in the round of sitting in a circle in the middle of the audience, like maybe 4 songwriters sitting in a circle with their backs to the audience. Okay. So, and the audience sat behind them, and they were in the middle of the audience. And now they've adopted this all over the world. You go and there's a in the round songwriter presentation. I'm like, I think that's really from Nashville, from the Bluebird Cafe. So you could go out every night, and that was a way to hear more than one songwriter at the same time. And the songwriters they'd go around the circle and they'd each sing one song, and maybe they would sing on each other's, or they would accompany each other on songs. But each one it's just trading songs, and there would be a very great spontaneous rapport between the songwriters and conversation, and so it's like the audience wasn't there; they were at their backs, and the audience was witnessing this sharing that the songwriters are doing. And then they would put songwriters in a line on stage also.
Wow,
in a
okay.
straight line, and you'd have 4 songwriters sitting on stools, and each one would do a song. And but that was a different kind of presentation. The In the Round is very special. So you could go out and hear, 4 songwriters in one night, and then they started having, more in the rounds. You could go, maybe they'd have 2 sessions in one night. You could hear 8 songwriters, 10 songwriters. There'd be songwriter shows. That one song, you just get up there solo all the time, solo performances, maybe one guy helping you with guitar or something. And songwriters are not good players, but they all can play 4 or 5 chords, and they can play their songs. Doesn't matter how good you are at guitar. It wasn't about the performance. It was about the song.
Okay.
It wasn't about the singing. It was about the song. So you could go out and hear all these songs and see what made a good song and how they put their songs together. And then you could go to workshops, and there were people who would teach you how to write a song, and there was a lot of literature and books that you could read about songwriting, and people think it's so easy to write a song. Oh yeah, it's like 3 minutes. You just okay, I wrote a song tonight. And yes, you can actually. A lot of the best songs come really fast. But like any other art form, I think someone who creates something, there's just this natural kind of human inspiration to want to work on it and pick it apart and kind of analyze it and perfect it. Painters, I think painters work on paintings for a long time, and then they abandon them, and they start a new one, and then they come back to it, and not until they feel that it's finished. So it's this process of creation, and this is where the emotional process is worked out. The emotions are worked out for an artist who is... For any person who wants to have a creative outlet, any of the arts is a great place to put it, And it's not about the result all the time. It's about the process. But the more you learn the process and the more you work on it, I mean, it's like making a carving. A sculptor might not make a sculpture in one day, overnight. They will work on it for a long time, and they'll try different angles. So they really get into kind of perfecting it. Same with songwriting. Yes, you can write a song in one night, and you might have one person as an audience. Your mother will probably love it, But of course, it's been analyzed of how to write a really effective song. That is going to have the most emotional impact on the listener, and how to put together a story. I mean, it's like putting together a short story. It's like putting together a novel in 3 minutes. And I know that people who write books are really amazed by songwriters who write an entire book in 3 minutes. Because it has to have a middle, a beginning and a middle and an end. So there's a way to keep the listener also. If they're not your mother, they might not keep on listening. So I just really enjoy that process. And I learned in Nashville how to craft. It is a craft, how to craft a good song. Now, art is always subjective, and what is a good song to one person might not be a good song to another person. But I always feel like if it's a good piece of art, even if you don't like it, it's better to recognize it as piece of work that someone has made, even if you don't like it, it doesn't mean that it's not good.